Yes, hello, and welcome to Pop Screen Pad, Geek Show Podcast Network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to deal with the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies, either by, about, or starring pop stars. No, the podcast covers such a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to science fiction, from documentaries to hip-hop, and I've just mixed up my musical and cinematic genres, which does occasionally happen.
We have a tally shot for him.
I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a writer for The Geek Show and for Horrified.com, the British horror website. I also make films, and I've been joined this week by...
Aidan F. Hi, yet again. You can't seem to get me off Pop Screen at the minute.
It's true. I wanted to give you a month off, and then I realised that I didn't have a Patreon show for May. So, yeah, had to move that one forward in the schedule.
Don't worry, listeners. I will take a month off, I promise. At least, yeah.
So, we have gathered here today to discuss Two-Lane Blacktop by Monte Hellman, which is one of those occasional films we do that has a double dose of music stars in the lead roles, with singer-songwriter James Taylor as the driver, no relation to Ryan Gosling, and Dennis Wilson as the mechanic, no relation to Charles Bronson or Jason Statham.
Is that it? Is that what you're going with for this week's intro?
I've been busy. I don't have time to write absolute goals for every single one of these.
Fair enough.
Yes. Was this your first time watching Two-Lane Blacktop, Aidan?
It was indeed, yes. Because I caught it on the very, very old Masters of Cinema release that I have on my shelf.
Right, yeah. I had seen it before when it was on Mubi, but I invested in a DVD for this show. I think I like it slightly, I don't want to say slightly more on the second time, but the first time I saw it, I thought, oh yeah, I like that. That's one of those sort of cool, minimalist, pessimistic things that 70s American cinema did very well. But I feel like I had more of a sense of the emotional pull of it on the second run. It's like that Onion headline, I appreciate the Muppets on a deeper level than you.
It's my Kermit the Frog. You can't have it.
Yes.
No, I mean, because I had a very different reaction to Two-Lane Blacktop, to put it safely. And it's normally, I mean, I don't want to undersell myself because I found it quite a cold film. Which I'm sure we'll get onto in a minute. But I think we should go into the setup of this because it's obviously one of those quintessential like new Hollywood films that gets revered an awful lot in circles from it's also a road movie, so I guess it makes sense just to cover an aspect of where it fits in that mode of American cinema, really.
Yeah, the driver and the mechanic are involved in car races, and that's basically how they fund their life. They just sort of drive around aimlessly, looking for different races to participate in, and that's what they do. It's a very minimal, purposeless life. There seems to be nothing they would do if they made enough money on car racing. They would be completely stuck for what to do next. And one day a teenage girl gets in the back of their car and they get in. Everyone is kind of... How would you describe the reaction when they first see each other? In fact, is there a reaction? Does anyone react?
That's the problem.
Yes.
because this is the thing with Two-Lane Blacktop, because it is such a film that is, I don't want to say it's like, doesn't have any emotion in it, because there is just such a blank canvas to be painted all across the way, like how you would discover America anyway. So it kind of fits in that era, I guess, that zeitgeist. And yeah, you can probably understand why I couldn't get much of a connection with it, because when I sat down to watch this, I just looked at my TV, was just like, am I supposed to get something from this? This is quite boring, to be honest.
It is very slow. Yeah, I will give you that for a movie about car racing. I think my initial problem is that anytime the main characters start talking, you suddenly realize that they are car people, capital C, capital P, car people. So there are like large stretches of dialogue in this movie where I just do not have a fucking clue what anyone's talking about, and I don't care either.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, because it opens up on like this sort of race. It's a opening, the opening race at least. It's stress free. Wouldn't you agree? Because it's very relaxed, even by racing standards. You at least think like, say Ayrton Senna, like in the corner, who is chugging along, like going 1,000,000 miles per hour around corners and tight bends. Here, it's not like that. It's it's very slowly built up through editing and shot composition.
Yeah.
And of course, apart from that, there's no dialogue. I don't think we even get the first line of dialogue until like 25 minutes into the film or something like that.
I think it's maybe slightly less than that, but it's true that opening race sequence is basically dialogue free. So yeah, it's very minimal. It's kind of in that mold of like turn of the decade road movies that were being made around that time. You can probably file it alongside Vanishing Point and Easy Rider, but it's its own thing, I think. And
yeah, I know. Yeah, because didn't this come out the same era as Easy Rider, or was that just
2 years after? Yeah. Easy Rider was 69. This is 71.
There's an awful lot of comparisons that I've read from people's reviews comparing it to Easy Rider, and I have seen Easy Rider as well years ago. So,
well, one of the oddest connections comes through its writer, Rudy Wurlitzer, who you've had priors with, haven't you? You've seen Rudy Wurlitzer's stuff.
Yeah, at some point on Pop Screen, and again, another appearance by me. We are thinking of doing Candy Mountain, but this is probably like can be in the back burner. But no, I've had experience with a little bit of experience, not too much. I have to bring up his CD again just to see what else he's done. Because haven't you? Oh, he did. Did he write the screenplay for Walker as well?
He certainly did. Yes,
I thought so. Yes, I knew there was something in the back of my mind niggling at me saying, "Hang on, he's done something else. He's done something else."
I mean, he's had a pretty great career, but this was his first big studio movie. I think he had been working a little on, and we're back to Easy Rider here, he'd been working a little on Dennis Hopper's The Last Movie, which was the directorial passion project that Hopper began work on with essentially the blank check that he got for Easy Rider being such a hit. And as big a hit as Easy Rider was, that's how big a flop The Last Movie was.
Yeah. I mean,
I read a story that, the studio were just giving people money if they had any connection with Hopper, because Easy Rider had been such a smash and they couldn't work out why. And Wurlitzer had like a loose deal to make a film set in India. And he went from the Peruvian set of The Last Movie out to scout locations in India. And when he came back, it was like the whole production was just in complete chaos and the studio was coming in to try and shut it down. You just thought, probably not going to get to make that Indian film, aren't I? So you shunted onto this instead.
Yeah. And he's a fascinating fellow, Wurlitzer, isn't he? Because he's just... because he seems to be cut from like a similar sort of cloth as I don't know really, like the screenwriters of those time. Like he was the guy who did The Last Detail again. Who wrote The Last Detail?
Robert Towne.
Yeah, Robert Towne. Yeah, he reminds me an awful lot of him. Like cut from very similar cloths. Like awfully does like slices of American life kind of cinema.
Wurlitzer to me is kind of like a he had a similar route into Hollywood as someone like Terry Southern, where, like Terry Southern, he wrote what used to be called these quote-unquote head novels, very druggy, very satirical, very psychedelic. And so when the studio realized that there was this mass audience for a film like Easy Rider that they didn't know how to access, they called these people. But I think the difference is that Southern is just merciless with everything. Southern takes the piss out of everything. But with Wurlitzer, there is this core, this kind of mystical quality and a deep sense of political injustice that he doesn't ironize. You can't entirely see it in Two-Lane Blacktop, but it's definitely there in Walker.
It's somewhat there in Candy Mountain as well, but I think it's because it's one of those obscure films that, again, I think we will cover for Pop Screen, just not right now. It's something that we'll get around eventually. Yeah.
Once it's become an active in-joke on the show that we still haven't done Candy Mountain, we'll probably do it. I think it's jockeying with Sorry to Bother You as our most mentioned film in terms of, we've got to do that movie one day.
Yeah, eventually. But for now, I keep suggesting the Graham 5 million movies that we can do for Pop Screen and need to stop.
But Wurlitzer was brought onto this as quite a late stage, and he was paired with the director Monte Hellman, who has a way with these big archetypal American genres like the road movie and the Western, despite having, I think, a name that suggests a British World War I general. Monte Hellman on the front lines giving Fritz a good licking. It's not the name that you expect for a chronicler of roadside Americana, is it?
And it's a very odd career he's had because, yes, you've mentioned Ride and the Whirlwind and The Shooting, which are like the two Westerns that he'd done before Two-Lane Blacktop. But I've also looked at the CV just here. 1989, Silent Night, Deadly Night, Part 3, Better Watch Out.
Yeah, it's a wayward career, isn't it? Yeah.
Hey?
Well, the thing with Monte Hellman is that he was a graduate of the Roger Corman School, and a lot of his early credits are like monster movies and gothic horrors. And it's like, there's no shame in that. You could say the same thing for Francis Ford Coppola. But the difference is that Coppola completely escaped that world and started to make big studio-funded blockbusters. And Hellman never quite did.
Yeah, Jonathan Demme came from that school as well, didn't he? Yeah,
tons of people did. Scorsese worked for Corman as well. I think any American director of that generation who is worth anything will probably have some Corman connections.
Yeah.
But like I say, Hellman, despite making a lot of films that are very, very well thought of, never quite got to that level where he was thought of as someone who exclusively directs art pictures rather than someone who directs a few art pictures, and then when he needs the money, he'll do Silent Night, Deadly Night 3, Better Watch Out. So yeah, a strange career and a sort of self-sabotaging career as well. I mean, the film he did after this with Laurie Bird, who plays the girl in the back of Taylor and Wilson's car, was Cockfighter, again with Warren Oates, who also appears in this film. And I think that is still banned in this country.
What, the Cockfighter?
Yeah. I
never realised this. No.
Yeah, it's one of the longest standing BBFC bands, up there with like Freaks and Battleship Potemkin, stuff like that. But unlike those, I don't think it's ever been overturned because it was on animal cruelty grounds, you see. And that's one area where the BBFC has not liberalised in that regard, you know.
Yeah, that's the only segment that it is, because I know that Criterion were trying to put out like a couple of Russian films out on the UK label, which they've had to sack because you know, the BBFC just wouldn't release them. I think Andrei Rublev was one of them.
Yes.
War and Peace was another one, which is okay. And of course, Come and See. And it's just like, yeah, they're still not okay with that. But I guess that's fine because they're releasing Pink Flamingo soon, you know.
Yeah, I guess.
So that's apparently fine, but never mind.
Yeah, unfortunately, Andrei Rublev has a very, very infamous horse fall in it, which has always been a bit of a sticking point. But it's sort of, I mean, it's a bugger for someone like Hellman because he just released this, which is essentially his graduating project after Corman University. It didn't do very well on release, but it still has a cult following, and ideally the film after that should consolidate that success rather than being banned.
Anywho, yes, back onto Two-Lane Blacktop, because it's because I don't know what to make of it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why that is because of the existentialism.
Yeah.
That I guess it's Wurlitz's doing, but you know, I kind of find it hard to believe to put all the blame in like one person's shoulders or anything like that.
Oh man, blame for existentialism. Blame Sartre if you're going to blame anyone, I'd say.
But no, I don't think it's him, and I think it might be just a group effort, personally speaking. But with, you know, James Taylor and Dennis Wilson, who are primarily not actors, and I know their performances are minimal on purpose.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's all I see it as. I just can't get any enjoyment out of like people just looking into the distance and going, I guess we've got to go drive south, Larry. You know, that kind of mumbly thing. And it's just like, no, sorry, this doesn't do anything for me.
It's funny. I'm not going to explain why this is because I think as soon as you say it, you'll understand what's reminded me of it. But when you were saying that, I was just reminded that you really don't like Nicholas Winding Refn.
That's the reason why. No, yeah. If people know me, I really don't like Nicholas Winding Refn. So hey.
I do kind of like that stuff if it's done right. I think it can very easily slip into being a pose or a shortcut to looking deep and significant. You know, when it's done badly, it's kind of like the, you know,
nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah. Well, it's like when, you know, you're at a student party and there's always some guy in the corner dressed in black reading a French novel that he doesn't actually understand because he's trying to like impress people by looking smarter than he is. And I should know because I was that guy normally, but it is really annoying behavior. I can accept that now.
Yeah. And that's not mean to say to demean Two-Lane Blacktop, because I do think there's qualities with it. I mean, it's 70s American cinema. I mean, it's like the golden age.
Yeah.
If you ask me, of like the new Hollywood era, because, you know, you had the likes of Hellman, you know, doing something a bit different. You had obviously taken from a lot from like European directors who I'm sure we'll get into. Like,
yeah, it's very Antonioni, isn't it?
I was reminded, you see, I couldn't point my finger on it for a while, just with all the glacial long takes of like, you know, the side for the longest time. And I just kept thinking, you know, this reminds me of a European director. You know, who could it be? I mean, it could be Brazon, I guess, but I don't like Brazon for like exactly the same reasons as I don't like Refn. And then it finally clicked. It reminded me of Chantal Akerman in a way.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And Ackerman's probably one of the only directors who does that glacial long take thing and does it well for me. I really like Chantal Akerman. Yeah,
I was going to ask what your feelings were on Ackerman, and I'm really glad you said that because I remember watching Gene Dielman, and that is normally the kind of punitive slow cinema that really rubs me up the wrong way. But I remember like looking at my watch at one point thinking, shit, I've watched 2.5 hours of this already. Yeah,
I think that it's probably because I guess they're also in like the documentary mode as well. And I think that's kind of the reason that I get from Ackerman, because she just had like yes, with all like the artistic framing, like the Ozu style framing that you see in Jan Dielman. And Jan Dielman is a film that I feel a bit cold about as well, only because of the length, really, and that's kind of it. But it's a film I respect a lot. It's not my favorite of hers, but I can totally get the appeal. And with this, it's kind of the reason why I say Ackerman is because of like, you know, the driver, the mechanic, GTO, who's Warren Oates' character.
Yeah.
And just the kind of like emotion that they get from them that's obviously burning passionate inside, but on outside they're just, you know, like blank, just completely blank towards each other. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I wonder how much of that passion is genuine, though. I think there's a kind of deep respect for cars, and there's a kind of nerdy fetishization of the details, but the car has a difficult place in these guys' lives because it's the thing they use to make a living, but it's not getting them anywhere. You know what I mean? The only thing that the car will do is get them to the next car race where they have to earn money to do another car race. And it's just this sort of meaningless cycle that they're stuck in.
Yeah, it's interesting that because the driver, because I remember reading, there's a decent essay actually in the Masters of Cinema booklet. And the writer says that James Taylor's character almost feels lost when he's not in his car. And then as soon as he like gets into his car, he suddenly becomes one. And I know that's deeply pretentious wording it like that, but you kind of see it like,
yeah,
you do see it in a way, kind of like how the singer-songwriter James Taylor is lost without his guitar or anything like that. So, and that's interesting for in that way. Yeah.
It's interesting. I didn't. I had to do a bit of reading up on James Taylor before we did this episode because he's not a guy I know a great amount about, and I was fascinated like how turbulent his life was with the sort of unhappy marriages and the drug addiction. And you think, man, he makes really laid back music. Imagine how chilled out he'd be if he had a quiet, happy life.
You see, I knew James Taylor because I'm not a James Taylor fan either, because I've never listened to any of his stuff. It's not because it's just simply because I haven't got around to it. That's all it is. I first came aware of them from Sailing to Philadelphia, which is the Mark Knopfler solo album where he does a duet with Mark. And Mark Knopfler always has a soft spot in my heart because he was like the first artist that I ever saw live.
Right.
So he'll always have my respect for that manner, and it's a lovely duet that they have on that album, to be honest with you. And that's how I first knew about James Taylor. But I always bracketed him as like kind of like, I don't know, kind of a John Cougar Mellencamp, like American singer-songwriter who might not be my taste, but you know what? As Graham was saying, it's very laid back, very chill. Honestly, I don't have anything against him.
Yeah, I certainly don't. I kind of feel like my musical taste can often get quite sort of laid back and adult oriented rocky, and you know, every time I go to YouTube they're always recommending me a playlist called Take It Easy Rock, which I resent, to be honest, but I see what they're doing. And James Taylor exists just to let me know that there is a point where I feel like this rock is taking it a bit too easy. You know, there is a line I won't cross, and I think James Taylor is on the other side of that line for me.
Yeah.
But he wasn't. I mean, when I first watched this film, certainly wasn't the name that attracted me to it. The name that attracted me to it was Dennis Wilson, because I'm a huge, huge, huge Beach Boys fan.
Yeah. And because, again, going on research, that apparently Hellman left it like 3 days before filming had begun to start without finding someone to play the mechanic.
Yeah, so it was, you know, you're in a crisis. You get the guy who's never acted before. It seems hard to imagine what could go wrong, really.
It wasn't until like one of his friends just immediately suggested Dennis Wilson for some reason.
Big car guy, apparently. That was the rationale behind it. Dennis Wilson also had a unique status in the Beach Boys. I don't know if you know what this is.
No, go on.
He was the only Beach Boy who could actually surf.
Which is ironic, considering, yeah, very ironic.
But yeah, that's sort of, I think the rest of them enjoyed the surfer lifestyle, which is fair enough. I enjoy the surfer lifestyle too. I like the beach. I'm literally wearing a stripy short-sleeved shirt. But, in terms of actually being able to surf, it was just Dennis Wilson. Yeah.
Yeah. You don't need any other further reason than that, really.
He definitely brought something to the band, like the ability to actually surf.
But he was also the drummer, wasn't he?
Yeah. He was the drummer, and he also was one of the principal songwriters. I mean, most of the Beach Boys stepped up to the songwriting plate after Brian Wilson had his breakdown, because obviously they couldn't rely on his songwriting anymore, but Dennis always contributed stuff to the albums. He also managed to get one song on, I think it was, 2020, one song co-written by one of his celebrity mates. I don't know if you know who that was.
Oh, I'm dreading to guess now.
The answer is not good. It's not a good answer.
Is it Donald Trump?
It's not Donald Trump. It's not that bad an answer. No, let's walk it back a bit. It's good old Charles Manson.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah, that's even worse, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in his defense, Wilson rewrote the song so heavily that Manson declared himself an enemy of Wilson's, which is, I mean, it's the right thing to do, but it's a bad enemy to make in a lot of ways.
It's kind of weird how Charles Manson pops up in like the weirdest of celebrity,
Completely. Yeah, he seemed to be
because for some reason, it was the nexus of like that scene, and you're surrounded by the likes of, from one end Neil Young to the other end Harrison Ford, and then of course it's really weird. And I guess that's the kind of the reason that, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was based on, really.
Yeah, definitely. And that, there's that whole scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where Damian Lewis is playing Steve McQueen, and he just goes through the party he's at saying, oh, that's Roman Polanski, that's Jay Sebring, that's, and revealing how many people just knew each other here. But yeah, Manson had written a song called Cease to Exist, and Dennis Wilson rewrote it as Never Learn Not to Love, which Manson found unacceptable. The thing that I find funniest about this story is Manson wrote Cease to Exist after he observed tensions between Dennis and his brothers Brian and Carl Wilson, and he wanted to write something that would help them out. Imagine having a family dynamic so fucked that Charles Manson thinks he can step in and mediate.
Yeah, that's a really difficult situation, isn't it? I mean, I don't even think I could, describe it all that well, to be honest. I would have to be there at the time to witness it.
It's very strange, isn't it? Because I don't know about you, but certainly when I was growing up, I had a picture of the Beach Boys that was, they're like the Sunshine Band who sing about little surfer girls and things like that, and they sing about their cars, of course. And then you actually get into the Beach Boys and you think, God, the Rolling Stones wish they had a story as dark as this in their arsenal. Yeah.
Again, it's kind of like the other ironic twist, because I never could quite get into the Beach Boys, weirdly enough. And I don't know whether it's simply because of their sound. It's just I'm a bit hit and miss about I guess that surfer pop zone of music. And even just recently, because I've finally for the first time listened to Pet Sounds.
Oh yeah.
And Pet Sounds is an album that I admire. I mean, there's some great songs on it. I mean, of course, it's the one with Wouldn't It Be Nice is on it, and of course, I think it's
God Only Knows.
God Only Knows, yes. A few songs, and but it's just nothing. It does really hardly much for me, and that's just down to my taste in music, because it can be sort of subjective, like your taste in humor.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it gets its hooks into you. It can be hard to see past that sort of stylistic element of surf pop because it's such an archaic form of music now. It's like the one aspect of the 1960s musical scene that just hasn't seen much of a revival over the years. So it's hard to link it to anything. But I do think the songs are spectacularly well written and they are deeply, deeply emotional.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, I'm waiting for the day. It just breaks my heart. It's incredible.
No, I completely, can't disagree on that. They definitely had that going for them. But combined in this film, both James Taylor and Dennis Wilson, how do you feel they work as a pairing?
They work as pairing in that I genuinely wondered if there was a draft of the script where they were identical twins. Like I thought, as a Beach Boys fan, I thought I'm going to be have a pretty easy time telling these characters apart, and then they walk on with the exact same haircut and the exact same like blue baggy shirt, and you think, wow, literally every American man in the 70s looked like this.
And I guess that works that way because they are used very, very sparingly. How, of course, because there's not a lot of dialogue. There's hardly much emotion to their faces. I mean,
yeah,
you do get scenes of them, like obviously when they're drifting out on the road and they stop by a diner, they eat breakfast there. They just go back to the regular routine. And it just goes back to what Graham was saying about, how sort of, I guess, mystifying the American life is, but at the same time, it's kind of dull, isn't it?
Well, kind of, yeah. But I think it's a purposeful kind of dullness. Like I've seen from the same period, I've seen some of Jean-Luc Godard's Dziga Vertov group Eva films. And if you want a picture of the dullness of everyday life that succeeds in being very, very fucking dull, that's a one-stop shop. But I think there is an aspect to this, and maybe if you don't click with it, you will just find it boring. But there is an aspect to this where I think it's very cool dullness. And I think, I can appreciate that the film is kind of a critique, but there is also part of me that would just like to be driving those big, wide open American roads and wearing 70s fashions. And I think I would be happier being bored there than I would at any other time or place.
Very vintage brand logos as well, because I've noticed there's a lot of Dr. Pepper references dropped in this. Like Dr. Pepper signs everywhere.
I think the only other film I've seen with Dr. Pepper product placement is there's that infamous moment in Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film where Peter Parker practices web shooting with a big old can of Dr. Pepper right in the front of the camera. So yeah, that's the weirdest film double bill I can imagine having.
Yeah, that is very weird. But no, back onto this, because, and that's not to say that there isn't drama in it, because there certainly is. I mean, they come across like all sorts of, like, they get pulled over by a police officer at one point.
Yeah.
Between, like, I think it's like some sort of, like, practice race between him and GEO. The Warren Oates character, and they both get pulled over. Taylor does a bit of a fib and say, he was going 90 over the limit.
Yeah.
Oates' character, and then he just gets into his car and just fucks off. And so it's just like, so it's not without those trimmings, I guess.
I will say, I mean, as much as I've said that the dynamic of Taylor and Wilson works for me and their minimalist acting styles works for me, I would be bored shitless if those two other characters didn't come into it. I could not watch those guys for a whole movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we've mentioned Laurie Bird as the girl and Warren Oates as GTO. I'll tell you what, as great a writer as Rudy Wurlitzer is, he's shit at coming up with character names, isn't he?
GTO. Wait, so he's named after the car? Wait, what?
Yeah, I guess. Some people in this movie really identify with their cars, or possibly he's named after the girl band that Frank Zappa managed. We'll never know.
But not literally.
Yeah, Warren Oates is great, isn't he?
Well, Warren Oates is just one of those actors who, accept in
Elevates
anything.
everything. Yeah,
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 yeah. But no, I would agree. If there's one part of the film that I did get like some enjoyment out of, it's definitely him.
yeah. Because I don't know what's your association with Warren Oates? He's someone who's done so much stuff that I feel like everyone always has a slightly different thing that they always think of when they see Warren Oates.
You see, now this is going to be the embarrassing moment where I'm going to have to look at my letterboxd and discuss what he's starred in that I've seen. Hang on. Oh, apparently I've seen 3 of his films.
For me, he'll always be Sissy SpaceX awful dad in Badlands. It's a small role, but
yes.
he kills it. And
The
then Martin Sheen kills him. Spoiler.
The Wild Bunch I've seen him in.
Yes.
That was years ago. I can't remember him being. Yeah, like I say, I'd seen that years ago. I haven't seen it since, so I have a very vague recollection of it. Of course, The Border, the Tony Richardson film as well.
Oh, yeah.
I've seen him in. And I remember him being quite good in that, as well as Sleeping Dogs.
Sleeping Dogs, is that the New Zealand film with Sam
Yes,
Neill?
with Sam Neill. Yeah, he's in that.
Oh, hell yeah, he is, isn't he? Yeah, I must have blotted that out of my memory because I spent the whole of Sleeping Dogs thinking, doesn't Sam Neill look young? It just sort of, it's cancelled out every other part of the movie in my memory. But yeah, you're right, he is in that.
And those are the 3 films that apparently I've seen with Warren Oates in it. So that's my intake complete.
I think he gives this movie a real jolt when it starts up because it's been, like I say, it's been a distinctive version of that kind of late 60s, early 70s road movie, but it has been in the vein that they were in. And then he turns up and he's like a refugee from a Coen Brothers movie.
Yeah, I guess.
He's so garrulous and there's a kind of a desperation to him that I think the driver and the mechanic also have a certain desperation to them, but they're too cool to admit that.
Doesn't he want to get with the girl as well?
Everyone wants to get with the girl in this movie.
That's the problem. Yeah. It's just that. Yeah, it was just ostentatiously horny, this film, in a weird way.
It is, yeah. It was the time before, I think it was the Ford administration that first established the horny police. So this is slightly before that.
And because that's the thing, because, the driver, and this is one of the few scenes that, that I kind of got a little bit of something out of, is when James Taylor is, teaching the girl how to drive.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the minimalist scenes that works well for me because, he's going over it so kind of casually about how you need to put your foot on the clutch and then, lift it up. And then obviously she stalls it. And then towards the very end of the scene, he goes in for the kiss as well. So it's just like, there's something about it that I quite like, actually. And I can't quite put my finger on it.
I think there is a tenderness to that scene, and tenderness is something which is not in great supply in the rest of the movie. Like, it's not a brutal movie, it's not a violent movie, but everyone is very good at concealing their feelings for the most part.
In fact, the most, violent thing that happens in this film is like a road accident. And, this is something that this road accident happens off scene, so you don't see the actual crash, but you do see like the aftermath of it. And it is described in, I can't remember, it's like somewhat graphic detail, but, like a passerby saying like he was driving on the wrong side of the road, there was nothing I could do. And that's like the most violent thing you get from it. Apart from that, it's incredibly relaxed.
The first thing you see of that road accident, you've just reminded me, is there's like a cloud of smoke or steam that emerges before you see the wrecked cars. And I didn't realize this, I didn't spot this on the first time I watched it, but that's also the case with the road accident in David Lowery's film, A Ghost Story. And that must be where he got that from.
Yeah, I faintly recall that. Yeah. That's a very good film, actually. Yeah.
It's the one that turned me around on Laurie. He's genuinely one of my favourite directors now, but it took me a while to warm up to him. Well, favourite, like current directors at least.
Mm.
Yeah, and Laurie Bird as the girl, I think, is such a raw nerve of a character, and she really puts it into a different orbit for me.
Mm-hmm. How so?
I think there were a lot of those kind of abrasive kind of child woman characters in American films of this era, like Mackenzie Phillips's character in American Graffiti. And they're always kind of interesting because sometimes on some levels they are kind of a male fantasy. They are a very dodgy male fantasy about a young innocent girl who's also like a hellcat. But I think there is an element of genuine pain, an element where the girl is genuinely lost that comes from Bird's absolutely horrible life story that she's channeling into this.
Because I literally I've clicked on her Wikipedia page and Jesus Christ.
Yeah, because I read it because I was wondering, why the hell have I not heard of this actress before? Because I think she is so good in this, and her mother died by suicide when she was a child. She ran away from home multiple times, much as her character does here, and she died by suicide when she was 26, the same age that her mother was.
Yeah, that's really, you do question whether that was, and obviously not to get into the grimness of this situation, whether that was intentional or
was
not.
It conscious? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's what gives it that element. I think you could write that part and give it to an actress who identified less with it, and maybe you would just be seeing the kind of dodgy a group of guys wrote this character aspects to it. But I never doubted that the girl was real, which is amazing because she's just called the girl. She is introduced just getting into a stranger's car and letting them drive her off, which is something that, I don't want to generalize about what women do and don't do, because there's a lot of women in the world, but they don't do that.
Yes, exactly.
But there's something in her performance that makes me believe in that as part of a psychological truth. It's like when they're driving away too, she just casually goes, "You guys aren't like Zodiac killers or anything." And you think a sensible person would have asked that before they drove off.
Or got into the car.
Yeah. But it feels consistent in her hands. She makes it feel genuine rather than just a contrivance.
Yeah, and those are the big fall that come up on this film. I've just realised by clicking on this that Harry Dean Stanton is also in this movie.
He is, credited as H.D. Stanton. I wonder when he stopped using that.
It's interesting, that, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, he plays the gay hitchhiker who comes onto GTO, which is great. I mean,
yeah. I mean, Harry Dean Stanton, come on.
What a man. Yeah.
A legend.
I think you probably didn't recognize him because it's like the only screen appearance I've seen of him where he isn't just comically old looking. I think he's not fresh faced, I guess, but he doesn't look like 1,000 years old like he normally does.
That's probably the reason why. Yeah, I mean, that's true. That is very true.
Because I was previously of the opinion that Harry Dean Stanton is one of those guys who didn't look young even when he was young. You look back at something like Alien or Repo Man, and he looks middle-aged even back then. But yeah, he is. He actually looks like a guy who's just starting out acting here, which is what he was.
Yeah. But no, it's a film that I feel cold about. Two-Lane Blacktop. I think I think it just comes down to personal taste. I just couldn't quite get into it as much as I would like to have happened, and that's kind of strange because the road movie I get a lot of enjoyment out of, whether that would be say the aforementioned Candy Mountain or Paris, Texas, which I think has a lot more of an emotional kind of hook to it. And for me, Two-Lane Blacktop just didn't quite have that hook.
It's
for
funny,
me.
yeah, because I corrected myself in my head there. I was about to say, oh, I'm surprised you like Paris, Texas, because that also has a lot of cold, silent characters. And then I thought, yeah, but it's building up to the scene in the booth, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And in Two-Lane Blacktop, there is no scene in the booth. There is no scene where these guys crack and reveal something of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think I honestly would have preferred that. But I mean, had it gone like, say, like, you know, the Chantal Ackerman way, like, say, like a Jean Dielman. I mean, I dread to think like a 4-hour cut of like
road
Two-Lane
trip
Blacktop.
across America in real time. Yes.
Yeah. But no, it gets my admiration for that. But for me, it just doesn't build to anything. And yeah, and that's just my sticking point with it, really.
The road is, if you will, A Road to Nowhere, which is the title of Monte Hellman's last film, released in 2010. Oh, yes.
We haven't talked about the ending yet either.
Yeah.
Because let's talk about that, because it ends abruptly. And I guess, you know, and that's the other memorable thing about it, because it just ends in like, you know, James Taylor gets into his car, drives off for like another race for money, and then all of a sudden it just stops, and then the image just burns.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, part of me thinks like, you know, maybe he took a little bit of an element from Persona, you know, the Ingmar Bergman film, where there's like an awful lot of things like that, experimentally wise. But then I also thought Stan Brakhage, weirdly enough.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, various other, you know, people that I could think of and whose style like concerns like the, you know, the format itself.
Yeah, I think the ending, you could go for Kiarostami. You could say it's kind of like a rough draft of the ending of Taste of Cherry, I guess. But
yeah, I still have it. Embarrassingly, I still haven't seen any Kiarostami.
I don't know if you're going to like him, because there is a lot of silent car driving in those movies as well, but they're worth trying just to see where you fall. But yeah, I think maybe that is one of the elements where I would say Hellman is struggling to match these kind of European directors he's influenced by, because there are plenty of films by Antonioni or Truffaut which end with the characters feeling a kind of hollowness and blankness, but they're also iconically blank. You know what I mean? I think maybe this does need an equivalent of the 400 blows freeze frame or the tracking shot at the end of The Passenger to really underline what it's doing, and it maybe doesn't have that, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, the thing is that I'm a huge Truffaut fan, though, weirdly enough, and I guess
that's not weird. He's great.
Yeah, Truffaut's great. I mean, it's largely because, you know, I don't know, there's just such a larger than life personality to him that I've always found acceptable. With this, I don't know. It's just, I guess it just abruptly ends. I guess for like Hellman's sake, for an artistic reason, it's there. You can get a reading out of it, certainly. But then again, I mean, you know, it's just like the ending of a film that I guess is just memorable in its own way.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's an element in this generation of Hollywood where people are doing things because no one had done them before. And that's kind of fun, and it's certainly admirable. And sometimes that leads to completely iconic experiments. And sometimes it leads to things that maybe could be a bit better. But I don't know. Like I say, I found a bit more in it on the second viewing, and I'm looking. I won't go back to it straight away, but I'm looking forward to watching it again.
Yeah.
So I think that's about covered everything, right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. So if you enjoyed that podcast, we give a bonus episode out every month on our Patreon, as we have hinted before, along with a lot of other goodies, including my Doctor Who reviews and some new features that Rob is busy thinking up that might have launched by the time this goes out. I don't know. I can't see the future. I'm not some crazy time man. But until then, I've been Graham.
I've been Aidan.
and we'll see you next week with more Pop Screen.